Did you know one of Michael Jackson's biggest hits could have sounded very, very different? In 1982, Michael Jackson phoned up Pete Townshend, although Pete probably didn't have an iPhone at that time. He was more of an Android guy. Michael said to Pete, "Hey Pete, I'm working on this new song. It's a bit more of a rock and roll song, and I'm looking for someone to record the blistering solo on it."
Alright, Michael Jackson, mate. Oh, how you doing? Really lovely to hear from you. Oh, I bloody love to do that, mate, but unfortunately, I'm needed elsewhere. I am otherwise engaged. Sorry about that. What a crying shame that is.
Those were his actual words as well. He didn't leave Michael empty-handed though, because he recommended someone else for the job, which we'll get onto in a bit. Hi, I'm Adam, welcome back to Music Mongoose. Michael, at the time, was recording his 6th studio album, Thriller, which would turn out to be the most successful album of all time, selling 70 million copies worldwide. No biggie then. On the album, Michael and his legendary producer Quincy Jones wanted a rock song to feature on the track list. In a 1984 interview, Jackson said, "I wanted to write a song, the type of song that I would buy if I were to buy a rock song. And I wanted the children to really enjoy it, the school children as well as the college students." So, naturally, Michael and producer Quincy wanted to approach a genuine guitar legend to fulfill the role, and Townshend was their first choice. You see, Townshend was certainly not a stranger to the odd collaboration. By the mid-70s, after releasing albums like Tommy and Quadrophenia, The Who were up there with the top of the global rock and roll giants. The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, although the Beatles not so much at that point. So Townshend would be an obvious choice for someone needing guitar work. He recorded with the likes of Paul McCartney, Bono, Elton John, the Rolling Stones, even David Bowie. In fact, in David Bowie's day job, long before he was a global mega superstar, he actually listened to some of Pete Townshend's early demos, and those demos ended up creatively inspiring David Bowie. So there you go, Pete Townshend's first proper fan was none other than David Bowie. Now those are some pretty solid bragging rights. Later, they collaborated on Bowie's track Slow Burn. This collaboration malarkey was easy work for Townshend and, more importantly, well-paid work. So by the time the actual king of pop was on the blower, Townshend must have thought, ka-ching! He'd have been an idiot not to say yes. But then he said no. To be fair, at the time, he would have been working on a few projects. The Who were recording and releasing their 10th studio album, It's Hard, which they then toured with in the UK and US. And he was also working on a solo album, All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes, released that year. So yeah, busy man is Pete Townshend, but as I said earlier, he did give Michael Jackson an alternative suggestion. Eddie Van Halen, the great American guitar player, as he would later label him. Pete was very fond of Eddie Van Halen's work. Shortly after Van Halen sadly passed away in 2020, Townshend reflected, "He was not just an innovative and stylish player with great taste, he was also a laid-back virtuoso showman who just blew us all away every time. Every shredder today has lost their master teacher and guide." And also, of course, Pete Townshend was one of Eddie Van Halen's guitar heroes at the time too. He was one of his great influences. In a 2011 interview, he said, "Pete Townshend was an influence as a rhythm guitarist. It was just the power and intensity. And again, simplicity. You know, nothing was very complicated. Like, listen to My Generation. Even the later stuff on The Who's Next. It's all very power chord based." So imagine being recommended from one of your guitar playing idols to play on an album which would become monumental. He must have been pretty chuffed. Although, when producer Quincy Jones first tried to contact him, he thought it was a prank call. In fact, he hung up the phone 4 times, told him to F off, and nearly changed his number before he realised what was going on. In 2012, Van Halen recalled the conversation. "I asked, 'What can I do for you?' And he said, 'How would you like to come down and play on Michael Jackson's new record?' And I'm thinking to myself, okay, ABC 1, 2, 3 and me. How's that gonna work?" Van Halen, of course, agreed to be part of the project alongside Steve Lukather from Toto. Lukather was on a roll of his own in 1982, having just released a very little-known song, Africa. Just 24 years old at the time, he was drafted to help out on this new Beat It song. Now, before you go into the comments and tell me off with your nasty words for not giving proper credit to the people who deserve it, as I understand it, Michael Jackson wrote and arranged the whole song. the riff, everything. Lukather then came along and tweaked it slightly and played both the bass and the guitar on the track. Is that right? Please? Now, in comes Van Halen. Immediately after hearing the current version of the song, Van Halen went about chopping and changing a major section of the track, then improvised 2 solos over the top. Now, Van Halen was understandably a little bit nervous about what Michael Jackson might think about his changes to the song, and when Michael entered the room, he was in a flood of tears. Not because Van Halen had been messing around with his song though. Apparently, a voiceover session was taking place next door for the upcoming film, E.T. Michael had apparently wandered into a rather emotional scene and let his emotions fly. According to Van Halen, when Michael heard the changes, he said this: "Wow, thank you so much for having the passion to not just come in and blaze a solo, but to actually care about the song and make it better." Reportedly, it only took Van Halen an hour or so to pump out those solos, and he also managed to set fire to a monitoring speaker in the studio. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. It could just be the stuff of rock and roll legend. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the album ended up becoming the most successful album of all time. I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars generated. Now, have a guess. How much do you think Van Halen was paid for his contribution? Have a guess. Nothing. Not a single penny. But it was his choice. Let me explain. You see, Van Halen had promised his band he'd never take on side work. But when it's Michael Jackson offering it, you can't really say no. So, to remain anonymous, he denied the credit on the song along with the payment, and was compensated in only a 6-pack of beer and a quick dance lesson from Michael himself, so that he could whip out some moves at his own shows. He didn't keep his involvement with the track secret for too long though. As the song climbed the charts, he eventually admitted it was him on the record. I love this quote from Van Halen. "I was buying something and Beat It was playing over the store sound system. The solo comes on and I hear these kids in front of me going, 'Listen to this guy trying to sound like Eddie Van Halen.' I tapped him on the shoulder and said, 'That is me.' That was hilarious." So, just what Michael Jackson wanted. A rock song that the children would like. Van Halen was clearly the perfect choice. And just like that, one of the most iconic songs of the 80s was born. Do you think it would have sounded different if Pete Townshend had done the solo on it? Let me know in the comments below. Speaking of Townshend, did you know there's this whole mystery surrounding him and Abby Hoffman? He supposedly whacked him with his guitar while on stage at Woodstock 1969, but all the footage of it is mysteriously missing. You can click the video here for the full story on that. Subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with my regular videos, and I'll catch you next time on Music Mongoose. Okay, bye bye.